November 1956. British paratroopers are dropping into the Egyptian desert. The objective is the Suez Canal. The operation is a complete tactical success. Within hours, British and French forces secure their targets. But 3,000 miles away in Washington, the American president is furious. Dwight Eisenhower does not send troops to stop the British. He does not threaten military action. He reaches for a weapon far more precise. He orders his Treasury Secretary to quietly prepare to sell off massive amounts of British pound sterling bonds. The threat is communicated in closed rooms. If Britain does not immediately halt its military advance, the United States will dump the pound, collapse the British currency, and bankrupt the empire in a single afternoon. The British Prime Minister, Anthony Eden, receives the message. He has no choice. He orders a humiliating withdrawal. The crisis proves to the entire world what insiders already knew. Britain is no longer in charge. How did America overtake Britain as the world's economic superpower? It was not through conquest. It was not through revolution. It was through debt, manufacturing, and a series of backroom financial agreements that most people never learned about in school. The dismantling of the most powerful empire in human history was a quiet, bureaucratic process. To understand how the United States acquired this leverage, we have to look back to a time when American power was practically non-existent and British dominance was total. The year is 1851. The Great Exhibition in London is open to the public. The Crystal Palace, a massive structure of iron and glass, extending over 19 acres, houses the wealth of the British Empire. 6 million people walk through its doors to see the wonders of the Industrial Revolution. They see steam engines, hydraulic presses, and power looms. Britain is the undisputed workshop of the world. They produce half of the globe's iron and coal. Their ships dominate global trade routes. The pound sterling is as good as physical gold. Back then, the United States is just a former colony of farmers and frontiersmen. They export raw cotton. They import finished goods. They borrow heavily from London banks just to lay the tracks for their railroads. But beneath the surface, a shift is already beginning in the American Midwest. Following the American Civil War, a ruthless generation of industrialists begins building a massive internal economy. Men like Andrew Carnegie adapt British steelmaking techniques like the Bessemer process and scale them up to unprecedented sizes in Pennsylvania. They verticalize everything from the iron ore mines to the rail transport. By the 1890s, the tipping point arrives. Without any global announcements or grand ceremonies, American manufacturing output quietly surpasses British output. The British are distracted. They are maintaining a sprawling global empire, fighting expensive colonial skirmishes in Africa and Asia, and paying for a massive naval fleet just to protect their shipping lanes. The Americans are simply building factories, extracting oil, and pouring steel. But manufacturing supremacy alone does not shift the global balance of power. The real transfer requires a catalyst. It requires kinetic action on a massive scale. It requires World War I. In August 1914, Europe descends into chaos. The conflict is heavily industrialized, and the system costs millions of lives. But wars of this magnitude require enormous amounts of capital. The British treasury, long considered a bottomless well of wealth, begins to drain rapidly. Ammunition, food, and fuel must be bought in staggering quantities. The British have to buy these supplies from the one nation with the industrial capacity to provide them and the geographic isolation to stay out of the fighting, the United States. Suddenly, the historical dynamic reverses. The British government starts borrowing heavily from Wall Street. Bankers like J.P. Morgan become the primary purchasing agents for the British Empire in America. Morgan creates a massive syndicate that spends $3 billion on behalf of the British and French governments. Ships leave New York Harbor loaded with artillery shells, wheat, and machine guns. They return carrying British gold bullion. Submarines threaten these shipments, but the wealth transfer continues. When the physical gold runs out, the British sell off the foreign assets they had accumulated over a century of imperialism. When those railroad stocks and mining shares are gone, they take out massive loans. By the time the armistice is signed in 1918, the global financial structure is unrecognizable. Before the war, the United States was the world's largest debtor nation, owing massive sums to Europe. After the war, the United States is the world's largest creditor. Britain, the former financial master of the universe, is now heavily in debt to American banks. This is the exact moment the balance of power shifts, but the old guard refuses to accept it. The British elite try to return to the pre-war normal. In 1925, they forced the pound back onto the gold standard at the pre-war exchange rate of $4.86. It is a disaster. Their exports become too expensive for the global market. Their domestic industries stagnate. Unemployment rises to terrifying levels. They are trying to project the image of imperial strength while rotting from the inside out. Then comes World War II. If the First War cracked the foundation of the British economy, the Second War levels the building entirely. By 1940, Britain is fighting for its literal survival against Germany. Their gold reserves are practically exhausted. Prime Minister Winston Churchill appeals to American President Franklin Roosevelt for help. The Americans respond, but not with charity. They introduce a program called Lend-Lease. The name sounds like a neighborly favor. The reality is a strict, calculated transaction. The United States provides military equipment, oil, and food. In exchange, Britain signs over access to global military bases and agrees to post-war trade concessions. In the famous Destroyers for Bases Agreement, the United States trades 50 obsolete naval ships left over from the First World War for 99-year leases on British territory across the Caribbean and the Atlantic. America is quietly acquiring the physical infrastructure of an empire at fire sale prices. The British have absolutely no leverage to refuse. They need the ships to defend their convoys from U-boats, so they trade away their geopolitical future to survive the week. As the conflict drags on, American planners begin looking toward the post-war world. They know Britain will survive the war, but they intend to make sure Britain never dictates global trade again. This objective culminates in the summer of 1944. 730 delegates from 44 Allied nations gather at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their goal is to design the international monetary system that will govern the post-war world. The conference is theoretically a collaborative effort. In reality, it is a brutal intellectual cage match between two men. Representing the British Empire is John Maynard Keynes. He is the most famous economist in the world. He is a towering figure, brilliant, educated at Eton and Cambridge, but physically failing, suffering from a severe heart condition. Representing the United States is Harry Dexter White. He is a hard-nosed, relentless treasury official. The son of Lithuanian Jewish immigrants, White is not famous, but he has the entire weight of the American economy behind him. Keynes wants a system that protects debtor nations like Britain. He proposes a new global currency called the bankor. He wants an automated system where creditor nations are penalized for hoarding trade surpluses, forcing them to spend money and keep global trade balanced. He is trying to design a system that will allow the British Empire to survive its massive war debts and maintain its welfare state. Harry Dexter White has absolutely no intention of letting that happen. White designs a system tailored specifically for American dominance. He demands that the United States dollar become the undisputed reserve currency of the world. The dollar will be tied to gold at $35 an ounce, and every other currency on earth will be tied to the dollar. White knows that America holds the vast majority of the world's monetary gold reserves, safely locked away in Fort Knox. He knows the British are flat broke. Keynes argues. He pleads. He tries to use his intellectual superiority to outmaneuver the American delegation in committee meetings. But intellectual superiority means nothing when the other side holds all the money. Historian Ben Stile argues that White carefully controls the drafting of the documents, burying the requirement for dollar dominance in complex legal phrasing. Keynes, exhausted, sweating in the summer heat, and suffering from minor heart attacks, misses the subtle traps until it is too late. The Bretton Woods Agreement is signed. The American dollar officially dethrones the pound sterling. The financial center of gravity officially shifts from London to Washington. But the humiliation of the British economy is not over yet. In August 1945, the war ends. The United States abruptly cancels the Lend-Lease program without warning. The British economy is immediately plunged into a severe crisis. They have no money to pay for commercial imports. They are facing severe food and fuel shortages. Winter is approaching. Keynes is forced to travel back to Washington. This time, he is not negotiating the future of the global economy. He is begging for a lifeline. Keynes asks for a massive grant of $6 billion to help Britain rebuild. He argues that Britain spent its wealth fighting a common enemy and deserves a gift, not a bill. The American negotiators listen. Then they refuse entirely. They offer a loan instead. $3.75 billion, with a 2% interest rate. But the money comes with a devastating string attached. The Americans demand that Britain make the pound sterling fully convertible to the dollar within 1 year of the loan being ratified. They are forcing open the closed trade networks of the British Empire. The British negotiators are horrified. They know that if the pound is freely convertible, every nation holding British currency will immediately trade it for dollars. The dollars are safe. The dollars can buy American manufactured goods. The pound is weak. Keynes advises his government that they have no choice but to accept the terms or face starvation. The Anglo-American Loan Agreement is signed in 1946. Keynes dies of a massive heart attack just weeks later. The trap set by the American Treasury is waiting to spring. In July 1947, Britain fulfills its legal obligation and makes the pound convertible. The result is absolute carnage. Just as the British feared, countries around the world instantly dump their sterling. They demand dollars instead. The British Treasury begins bleeding its dollar reserves at an astonishing rate. Within 5 weeks, the British economy is pushed to the brink of total collapse. They are forced to suspend convertibility in August, breaking the terms of the agreement, but the damage is already done. The rapid drain of reserves shatters whatever remaining confidence the international markets had in the British pound. The loan that was supposed to save the British economy ended up proving its fundamental weakness to the entire world. The empire is now essentially on life support, entirely dependent on American goodwill and American capital. This brings us directly back to the Suez Crisis of 1956. When Britain teams up with France and Israel to seize the canal from Egypt, they do it without asking Washington for permission. Prime Minister Anthony Eden still firmly believes he is managing an independent, sovereign empire. He thinks the Americans will eventually support the operation, or at least stay out of it. He is historically wrong. Dwight Eisenhower is dealing with a global Cold War. He is trying to keep Arab nations from aligning with the Soviet Union. The British imperial adventure in Egypt is a massive liability for American foreign policy. So Eisenhower uses the leverage his predecessors spent half a century building. He targets the British currency directly. The United States blocks Britain from accessing its own drawing rights at the International Monetary Fund. Simultaneously, American Treasury officials prepare to dump massive holdings of British bonds on the open market. The message is simple and devastating. America controls the money, so America controls the foreign policy. The British withdrawal from Suez is the terminal outcome of a process that started decades earlier in the steel mills of Pennsylvania. It is the final, undeniable proof that the transfer of power is 100% complete. The country that once funded the Industrial Revolution, that financed the defeat of Napoleon, that ruled over a quarter of the Earth's population, had been reduced to a client state of its former colony. The mechanism of defeat was not military. It was economic. It was the slow, steady accumulation of sovereign debt. It was the catastrophic loss of manufacturing capacity. It was the desperate trading of geopolitical assets for short-term financial survival. The British elite convinced themselves that their cultural prestige and their historical legacy would protect them from the cold math of international finance. They believed the special relationship with the United States would guarantee their status and their security. They learned too late that in the ruthless world of great powers, there are no special relationships. There are only national interests. The United States systematically dismantled the British financial system because it was in the American interest to do so. They used massive loans as weapons. They used currency convertibility as leverage. They built the Bretton Woods institutions not to share power globally, but to institutionalize their own absolute dominance. And the strategy worked flawlessly. The dollar remains the global reserve currency to this day. American military bases, many acquired during the desperate fire sales of the Second World War, still dot the globe from the Caribbean to the Pacific. But this is not just a history lesson about the mid-20th century. It is a blueprint of how empires actually fall. And it is a warning. The exact same patterns that governed the collapse of British economic supremacy are highly visible in the world today. The slow, undeniable erosion of domestic manufacturing capacity. The heavy systemic reliance on foreign capital to fund massive domestic deficits. The aggressive weaponization of the financial system against geopolitical rivals. The dangerous assumption that historical dominance automatically guarantees future security. The British genuinely thought their empire would last forever. They thought their currency was completely invincible. They thought their national debts could be managed indefinitely through clever accounting. they were fundamentally wrong. As you watch the current shifts in global trade patterns, as you see new alliances quietly forming to bypass the dollar network, as you watch critical industrial capacity shift across oceans to rival nations, you have to ask yourself a very difficult question. Are we watching the exact same cycle play out again in real time? Is the debt trap slowly closing on a new target? Let me know in the comments which economic superpower you think is next to fall. And if you found this historical breakdown valuable,